Are you looking at a 2011 to 2014 Ford Powerstroke? If you are, in this video we're going to be talking about their common failure points and issues, solutions for each one of them, so that you can make sure you get the best deal on the truck you're trying to buy, or you can make sure that the truck you already own stays reliable. First thing we're going to talk about is the engine. The 6.7 liter Powerstroke that came out in 2011 is still for sale today, so it's clearly an engine that's proven itself to be reliable. It followed up the 6.4, the factory compound turbocharged V8 that Ford put in their trucks from 2008 until 2010. It was a powerhouse of an engine, and it had a huge amount of aftermarket tuning potential. With nothing more than a tune, we've seen 250 to 300 wheel horsepower gains on a stock truck. That's insane. The problem with the 6.4 is that it also likes to turn its internals into a metal fondue. And that's where their shortcoming is. The reliability problems that the 6.4 had were astronomical. They far outweighed the 6 liter. And so then the 6.7 that came in to replace it had a big reputation to try to gain back as a reliable V8 diesel, because the 6.4 wasn't it. And for the most part, it worked. The 6.7 liter Ford has proven to be a very reliable base engine. We haven't done head gaskets or bottom end repairs on these in years, and when we do, it's so few and far between that it seems quite rare. And we've seen modified trucks, stock trucks, high mileage trucks, and low mileage trucks, the bottom ends, the rotating assemblies, and the general engine proving to be a reliable unit that you don't really have to worry about from 2011 till now. The accessories are some of the problems that we see with them, and that's what we're going to go through today. But for a rotating assembly, they're pretty stout. There's one caveat to that though, and that's this. That's a TSB from Ford regarding their early 2011 production engines. There is a best after date for the 6.7. One of the problems that happens, although rare, is catastrophic, is the valve seats will break off, go past the intake valve, and then bounce off the end of the glow plug and break it. The broken tip of the glow plug will then ping pong around your internals until you need a bottom end and a cylinder head, basically an entire motor replacement. That's a catastrophic problem, and it was very expensive. Most of the times the failures happened within the warranty period, so Ford paid for it. But if you do have one of these trucks built before that date that's never had an engine replacement done, unfortunately you can't just replace the glow plugs, it's a valve seat issue. Is it a very common thing? No, but is there any reason to believe that the engine getting older is any less likely for the failure? Probably not. So if you're looking for the most peace of mind, buy a Ford 2011 Powerstroke after that date, or an 11 to 14. A few examples of this happening is rough running, rough starts, and any kind of codes related to the glow plug system. If you see those, have it inspected, because it could mean something bigger. One of the easiest things to spot when you first go look at one of these trucks is whether or not it has an oil leak. And that's best noticed on the 2011s and 2012s from the likely culprit, which is the lower oil pan. They're plastic, and they have a tendency to warp, crack, break, leak, and they're just really bad at holding their fluid in, which is why we sell upgrade kits like this, which are metal replacement units that can go where the plastic one was. They're high quality units, and they add a little bit of flair to it, so they even work on the 13s and 14s. The next oil leak that we see is actually on all of them, and it's quite often the upper oil pan gasket. And the reason that one's a bit of a pain is because in order to replace it, you have to remove the transmission off the back of the engine. That's a big job. So if you have one of these trucks already, or you're looking at one of these trucks that doesn't currently leak from the upper oil pan, buy it, own it, and then replace your CCV filter. The crankcase vent filters that get plugged increase the internal pressure from blow-by inside of the crankcase, and they have to find a new outlet if the CCV is plugged. Generally what we're seeing, and why these leaks are so common, is when a plugged CCV filter is there, it causes the next lowest point of resistance, which happens to be the upper oil pan, to become the new vent. And that's why we're seeing so many upper oil pan leaks. Those are the two common areas for leaks that we see on these trucks. That isn't to say there won't be more. You'll just have to check on the specific truck you're looking at whether or not it has other ones, due to the fact that it's older. Next up, once again, we have to pick on the 11 and 12 trucks. Their turbochargers use ceramic ball bearings inside of them, and they're hopelessly unreliable. They have a high failure rate, and they constantly cause issues like noises, low power, and high fuel consumption. The last of which would be hard to tell on a test drive, which is why we highly recommend driving more than one truck to get a feel for how these trucks should drive. So if you drive one with a problem, you'll be able to feel it when you test drive it. The later 13 and 14 trucks are much more reliable with their turbochargers, but at this point they are getting old. What we would recommend is if you are going to replace the turbocharger, it's not even a problem if it's bad when you look at it, because it just discounts the truck and then you can put parts into it after. The solution to offer for this is to go with a KC turbocharger retrofit kit, which puts the 2017 Plus Powerstroke turbo on the 11 to 14 trucks. These turbochargers are bigger without losing any of the reliability or drivability because they're still VGT turbo units. That means you can have a lot more top end, you can tune into the truck a little bit more. The solid transmission behind this engine will keep up with a lot of the power gains you can get on this thing, which means there's little to no downsides in throwing one of these turbochargers on there, and their replacement costs over top of a factory replacement unit isn't very much. So they offer a really nice upgrade. You can run it stock or tuned with a bigger power number, as well as you get much more reliability than your factory turbocharger. This is probably the #1 recommendation I would do for an 11 to 14 Powerstroke in terms of upgrades / reliability mods. Unfortunately though, it's not quite as cut and dry as just replacing it with the 2017 Plus turbocharger. There are 2 other symptoms that you can hear, whether or not it's a failing turbocharger or if it's a failing exhaust manifold, and that is a high-pitched squealing noise. If you hear a high-pitched squealing noise with one of these trucks, it might sound like a belt squeal. Open the hood and see if you can listen to see if it's coming from the front, therefore it's likely a belt squeal, or the rear, then it could be one of 2 things, the turbocharger or the exhaust manifolds failing. If the exhaust manifolds have failed, maybe going with the 2015 to 16 retrofit kit will be better for you, because that retrofit kit comes with exhaust manifolds to hook up to the 16 turbocharger, rather than the 17, which just installs using your factory manifolds. So there's a little bit of a difference there. If you do have failed manifolds, you may as well go with the 15-16 upgrade. If you don't have failed manifolds, you can go with a 17 upgrade. Or in the end, you can also go with a factory replacement turbocharger. Any new 2011 to 2014 replacement turbochargers won't have the ceramic ball bearings that they had in the 11 and 12s. So there are quite a few options to go with when replacing the turbocharger on your 11 to 14 Powerstroke. The next point of failure on these trucks is the CP4 injection pump. Now this pump has a whole bunch of things around it. It was fitted in the Cummins and the Duramax and the EcoDiesel and the Nissan Titans, as well as the Powerstrokes, and it fails everywhere. The problem with these pumps is it has an eccentric roller in the middle of it that moves 2 hydraulic lifters. They will interfere with each other when contaminants or water gets into there, and then they will start wearing each other out. One piece of metal shavings turns into 1,000 pieces of metal shavings, and those get put into your fuel system. So all of a sudden, your injectors, your fuel rails, and your whole return system are all full of metal confetti, requiring, at minimum, the injectors and fuel rail to be replaced, as well as the pump that failed. It's a very expensive $10,000 plus bill if one of these goes. Symptoms of a failing pump will include metal in your fuel filter. That means it's already started to fail and the metal has made it to the pump, up through the lift pump, back into your filter. That means you should stop driving the truck immediately and start getting it looked into, cleaning and or replacing the CP4 pump and seeing where else the metal has gone. Another warning sign is poor acceleration or a loss of power. Basically, once those rollers start to wear out, they get less lift, less fuel pressure means less power. Low fuel rail pressure codes are also another warning sign, so if you see one of those on a truck that you're looking at, I'd bring it to a shop to have it inspected. They can pull this little valve out and you'll see the confetti right under there. It'll be immediately apparent whether or not that's happened. Difficulty starting can also happen with these, so any of those symptoms, if that's a truck you're looking at, I would be at least concerned and have it inspected professionally by a mechanic. Solutions for this problem can range from mild to vary depending on how concerned you are or how much money you want to put down up front. The first thing you can do is get an X-Energy fuel system saver, which basically replaces the solenoid on the top. What this does is it has a small metal mesh screen that all of the fuel that goes towards your injector passes through. When the metal shavings come up from the bottom to the top, they hit that screen, and generally on the factory one, they blow right through it. It's very weak, it's very cheap, so when it gets pushed out of the way, the metal continues on its journey towards your injectors. When you upgrade it with the X-Energy one, they put a much higher filtration and a much stronger screen on that, and otherwise left the truck stock. You don't have to change anything, you plop it in there, you plug it in, and you can forget about it. It's a cheaper solution, but the problem is it offers no preventative measures on the CP4, and it doesn't protect your fuel return system. That means if your pump fails, your return line, your fuel tank, and all your fuel lines and filters will still have metal confetti inside of them. It's only the injectors and fuel rail that you're saving, and you still have to buy another CP4 pump. The next solution is to get the S&S diesel kit. What that does is it completely separates your top and bottom half of the fuel pump itself, which means that the fuel that goes in and lubricates that eccentric roller is no longer the fuel that's going to go to the top part here that goes to your injectors. So when the pump fails, nothing can ever go towards the injectors because they're separate systems. But it also intercepts the return line system with a fuel filter so that if the pump fails, none of the metal shavings go into the return system, saving you the cleaning bill. So that's the next step up from this solenoid because it protects everything outside of the pump from getting touched from the pump failure. It's a great solution, but it is kind of a preventative measure if you don't truly believe the pump's gonna fail. Because if you buy that, install it, and then have a pump failure and have to buy another CP4 pump, you're almost at the cost of our next solution, which is also made by S&S, which is a pump replacement. There's a conversion kit for these trucks where you can put an agricultural heavy-duty pump that is proven to not fail retrofitted onto your Powerstroke. Removing the CP4 altogether completely prevents the need from having to worry about it in the future. It's the only surefire solution. It's a little bit of money up front, but it is a lifetime guarantee that a CP4 can't fail. As I said, there are some symptoms of these failing, but if you are either going to buy one of these trucks with a CP4 or already have one and you don't want to replace the pump yet, there are things you can do to help its lifespan. First, use quality filters. The factory filters for these trucks are very good. Make sure you replace them regularly. Use quality fuel and use fuel additives to increase lubricity. The problem inside of these pumps is that they get abrasive on each other and then they wear each other down. So if you add lubricity with an additive, you can prevent that from ever happening. After the fuel pump, you might have to look at the vacuum pump. These are known to leak oil, and it is a hugely simple fix. It's like $12 for the gasket, and it's a very short amount of labor to get it done. There's tutorials on YouTube on how to do it. It's on the top of the engine. You want to check to see if it's leaking, and if it is, budget in a little bit to repair it, but it's a very simple but common problem. From there, the only thing you really have to worry about on these trucks is the person that owned it before you. The transmissions on these things are stout. They can make 500 to 600 wheel horsepower without batting an eye, but they're strong, not indestructible. If the person before it has a lift kit on it with 40-inch tires, a completely stock transmission, and a 5-position tune, and he's telling you how great that transmission works when he's got it in position 5 and he's towing his gooseneck, maybe I would walk away from that truck. You want to make sure that it has regular filter changes. You want to make sure that the fluid is nice and smooth, smells sweet, and is not burnt. They're not indestructible, they're just very good. So as long as the owner wasn't beating on it, you can be pretty trusted that the transmission's gonna do you fine. The next thing you want to look at is the suspension. Is the truck lifted? Is it stock? Is it leveled? Has it been lifted professionally? Is the kit of a name brand quality? How long ago was it done? Have all the suspension components been kept up, or are there any leaks? Basically, lift kits don't add unreliability. They don't really change the truck at all. It's all about where it was installed and by who, and what kind of quality the kit is. If it's some name you've never heard of with cheap looking welds and it was done in a driveway by someone who doesn't seem mechanically inclined, maybe it's not the truck for you. But if it's a name brand lift kit with a good installation, he's got receipts and it shows that it was done well, I wouldn't have a problem with that truck. The next problem you might see is rust. These trucks are starting to get older, so we're starting to see more signs of fatigue on the body. Specifically, the white ones seem to be having it the worst, and we're not sure if that's because work trucks get annual car washes, or if they get driven on gravel roads at Mock Chicken, or if it's just because the white paint is specifically worse at fending off rust. Whatever the case may be, you want to do an inspection. Basically along the rocker panel is very susceptible to rust, all along the bottom of the doors on the inside and the outside. The kick plate, as you get in and out, people will drag their feet and it'll rub the paint off. All kinds of small places you want to look for rust. After that, it's maintenance. You want to make sure that there's no suspension play, there's no uneven wearing on the tires, there's no cupping. You want to make sure there's no driveline vibrations. You want to make sure they have receipts for regular servicing. You just want to make sure that the truck you're looking at has been serviced regularly and doesn't have any specifically glaring problems. They're not specific to Ford, it's just a used old truck. You want to make sure that it was well maintained. Next up is emissions equipment. Fortunately, these trucks had some and you have to worry about maintaining it. Very expensive to fix, even more costly to replace if it completely goes bad. There are a couple solutions to that. Make sure that it has no check engine lights or warning lights regarding it, and if you're looking at a truck that has all of the emissions equipment intact, go for at least a half hour to 45-minute drive with that thing, or let it idle the entire time you're looking at it. Because if they cleared the codes beforehand, sometimes it takes up to a half hour before that code comes back. That is just something to worry about because it's very expensive and problematic across the board for all makes. Emissions equipment's difficult to deal with. If it's been removed, there are certain stages of having it removed. You have to remove the DPF. If the DPF is there and they have an emissions off tune, that thing is going to be plugged full of soot. The EGR is recommended to be removed because when the tune commands it closed and you leave it there, it can sometimes fail open. So a full DPF and EGR removal is the best way to have a truck deleted with a quality tune that makes sure that doesn't have any emissions codes. That is the way you would want to see it. If you see one of the other setups, you might have to budget for doing that yourself. So having a deleted truck or a stock truck is both fine. You just want to make sure they both work in the way that they should be. With all of those considerations, it's easy to budget yourself in and out of a 6.7. You know what problems to look for, and if you see them, you can budget the owner down and get the right deal on your truck. As well as if you already own one of these trucks or you pull the trigger, you know what upgrades or recommendations you can do down the road to ensure you get to put the miles on your truck that you want to. The 6.7 liter Powerstroke, especially in these years, could be a great steal, and if you get into it for the right money, they can do really well for you as trucks.